When Deus Ex launched in 2000, it didn't just mix genres, it broke them open. It looked like a shooter, played like an RPG, and let you approach every mission your own way, sneaking, hacking, talking, or fighting. No two players saw the same game, and that was the point. But the freedom it gave players came from a team that didn't agree on what the game even was. Designers argued over the realism of gameplay, writers pulled in opposite directions, the artists weren't even part of the core team. And behind the scenes, this all led to Deus Ex being built through conflict, one vision being pushed against another. And even with all of this going on, Warren Spector just wanted to make a game of his dreams. But what he got in return was a game that changed gaming forever. Warren Spector had been trying to make Deus Ex long before the name even existed. In 1995, while still working as an executive producer at Origin under EA, he had drafted a pitch for a grounded real-world role-playing game called Troubleshooter, inspired by Ultima Underworld and System Shock. Spector wanted to push the idea of immersive simulation even further. But Origin wasn't interested. EA didn't see the value in a game about real-world choice, stealth, and consequences. At Origin, he'd already grown tired of the usual fantasy and sci-fi templates. I was bored to death of making games about heroes in chainmail or plate, looking like the mighty Thor, saving princesses, and slaying evil mages. So when Paul Neurath at Looking Glass offered him the chance to build a new studio in Austin in 1996, he took it. The team started small: Warren, Harvey Smith, Chris Norden, Al Uruso, and a few others, helping with ports and prototypes while pitching ideas to publishers. One project was an experimental online RPG called Air. Another was a spy-themed stealth game called Shooter, starring a Bond-like agent who could hack any device. The team floated ideas about nanobots, modern-day conspiracies, and player agency. But none of it got traction. It was really crude, said Steve Powers. It never really went further than a few mock-ups, some sketches, and documents. Then, in 1997, the money ran out. Looking Glass was in trouble, and Spector made the call to shut down the Austin office. I remember telling Paul Neurath to shut us down, Spector recalled. I mean, shutting down the mothership didn't make sense. I said, I'll find another deal, we'll be okay. That's what I said. Arrogant, I guess. But I was pretty confident. I had a strong team and knew what game I was going to pitch. That was the point when I dug up a proposal I'd written up in 1995, a pitch for a game called Troubleshooter. The rest of the team stayed, unpaid, working in the rented office spaces, because the lease was still active. That's when John Romero pulled into the parking lot in a yellow Hummer. Romero had started Ion Storm in Dallas, and was trying to line up new projects in different genres. He'd already brought in Tom Hall from Anachronics and was trying to land Tim Schafer for an adventure game. But when he heard that Spector's project had been shut down, he drove to Austin himself and made his pitch. I said, you can make any game you want, take as long as you want, and money's not an issue, Romero recalled. And Romero's offer was staggering. John drove down to Austin from Dallas and said, make the game of your dreams. Biggest budget you've ever had, biggest marketing budget you've ever had, and no creative interference. Who the hell says no to that? I sure as hell wasn't able to. He didn't need much time to decide either. I thought about it for about 3.5 seconds and said, I'm in. Spector kept his studio in Austin, kept his team together, and received full autonomy from Ion Storm. So we just joined Ion Storm, with Eidos as our publisher. Both were great, both lived up to every promise John made. While the Troubleshooter pitch didn't survive, its DNA did. Spector was still chasing the same dream, a real-world RPG that merged choice, consequence, systems, and agency. There were 3 genres at the time that were frustrating me. One was shooters, one was stealth games, and one was role-playing. I had no idea if it was going to work. And now, for the first time in his career, he had the freedom to try. And what came next changed everything. The biggest problem the team had to solve was figuring out what Deus Ex actually was. Fortunately, Warren Spector already had a vision. We knew with a high degree of confidence what kind of game we wanted to make. This was possible for 2 reasons. First, Deus Ex is a natural outgrowth of work done by, and in some cases with the late limited Looking Glass technologies. Second, and on a personal level, Deus Ex is a game I've been thinking about since right around the time Underworld 2 shipped. And he's tried twice before to make this game: Troubleshooter at Origin and Junction Point at Looking Glass. Both failed to reach production, but the concepts never left him. Despite the failure of those games to reach production, they laid much of the conceptual groundwork for Deus Ex. But instead of rushing into production, Spector made a different call: slow down. We spent the first 6 months of Ion Storm Austin with a team of about 6, just thinking about how we could turn our high-level goals into a game. One of their first big decisions was to push the setting into the near future. The real world, as they discovered, was very limiting. Moving the timeline forward 50 years gave them the room to bend reality just enough to support their ideas: nanotech, surveillance states, and secret wars. The first draft was a document called Shooter, a title they never actually intended to reflect the gameplay. Shooter proposed a conspiracy-laced near-future RPG that would span real-world locations like Paris, Hong Kong, and Washington, D.C., and would follow an augmented government agent unknowingly working for a global manipulator named Adam. The pitch read like the Manchurian Candidate, blended with RoboCop and the X-Files. "You are one of these agents," it declared, "endowed with nearly superhuman abilities, implanted with a brainwashing device, and sent to cripple or destroy each of the ancient and secret societies." The world of Shooter was meant to feel familiar and terrifying. The proposal outlined real missions: sabotage, extraction, reconnaissance, and a world simulation designed to make every player's choice matter. Situations evolve over time, influenced by player action or inaction. Trusted friends become enemies. Familiar locations become strange and dangerous. At the same time, Spector and the team wanted the game to connect with people on a broader level, not just as players, but as citizens of the world. "One of the things I'm committed to is finding things people already care about rather than trying to make them care," Spector said. "We started looking around at what normal humans, not just gamers, were thinking and talking about. What we found was that Y2K was on people's minds. The rise of AI, terrorism, human augmentation, bioengineering, unequal distribution of wealth. Those things would be the heart of our world," Spector said. And then came the conspiracies. "I really started getting off on the millennium weirdness," Spector recalled. "The conspiracy stuff on the web was just awe-inspiring. The stuff that some people believe is just outrageous." He wanted the world of Deus Ex to feel grounded in these real-world myths, to play like a conspiracy theory simulator. "We did a vast amount of research into real conspiracies: the Kennedy assassination, Area 51, the CIA pushing crack into East LA, Eisenhower's UFO connection, Freemasons tunneling below the Denver airport. Only a fraction of this made it into the game. Key hires began to shape the foundation into something playable as well. The idea started to really gel after Warren hired Harvey Smith," said John Romero. Smith was already obsessed with stealth and systems-driven level design. "As soon as Warren started talking about a first-person shooter RPG with spy fiction background stuff, I just wrote a mission description," Smith said. "It was all about surveillance from one side of a hotel, across a courtyard, planting information, blackmailing, and sniping. The mission never made it into the final game, but the tone and goals stuck." The game's political voice emerged slowly, through arguments, books, and personal awakenings. "Most of the political thinking came out of conversation between Warren and Sheldon," said Austin Grossman. "Sheldon Picardi, who originally applied as a programmer, didn't even know he was being interviewed for a writing job. Picardi's worldview shaped the game's philosophy. I've always been a very political writer," he said. "I'm attracted to social change and revolutions. If you see allusions to Foucault in there, that probably came from me." He did end up rewriting the story halfway through the project, with a tone no one else on the team could have replicated. As Harvey Smith explained, Sheldon could come in and back it all up with deep historical examples. What began as a cyberpunk spy game gradually became something stranger and more ambitious, a philosophical reflection of its time. "That period from 97 on was a political awakening for me," said Smith. "I don't think I've ever heard anyone say the people you call terrorists are freedom fighters to someone else before." The team read books about secret societies, global finance, the NSA, and the Knights Templar. Right before the new millennium, secret societies were all the rage, said Steve Powers. But Spector didn't want the players to feel like a chosen hero. He wanted a world that responded to curiosity. The game had to be about how clever and creative players were, not how clever and creative we, as developers, were. That meant making a game not just about killing monsters or saving the world, but about asking questions, and letting the players answer them. By March 1998, the team had written over 300 pages of documentation. "We thought we knew everything we needed to know to make a game," Spector said. "We were ever so wrong." The moment Ironstorm Austin began building Deus Ex, the game started to change. Not from lack of direction, but because reality had other plans. Deus Ex was like all projects, a living, evolving, growing thing, Warren Spector wrote. There were some amazing growing pains associated with its development. Getting everyone on the same page wasn't always easy. Okay, sometimes it was a nightmare. The team had entered pre-production with a clear vision. They had a world of conspiracies and nanotech spies, gameplay rooted in freedom and reactivity, and a 300-page design document that laid everything out. But once development started in earnest, the document began to erode. The team ballooned from 6 people to over 20. Spector began hiring aggressively. And then came the surprise. The entire art team was assigned to them from Ironstorm Dallas, hundreds of miles away, led by an art director who wasn't even on site. That remote setup created friction, but the bigger disruption came from the creative collisions inside the studio. As we brought on new people, Spector said, we found ourselves to be a team of hardcore Ultima geeks, hardcore shooter fans, hardcore immersive sim fans, strategy game nuts, and console gamers. Everyone brought their own ideas about what Deus Ex should be. Some wanted realism down to architectural proportions and weapon accuracy. Others pushed for simplified systems that worked universally, rather than being specially cased. These opinions created a culture split into maximalist and minimalist. And the more they debated, the more the design began to shift. With all the new folks contributing and all the feedback from our own chosen critics, Spector said, well, let's just say we had some interesting debates at Ion Storm Austin. Out of those debates, new ideas arose, and the game changed as a result. Technology also had its say. From the beginning, Spector hoped that licensing an existing engine would save time. After reviewing their options, they passed on Quake and chose the Unreal Tournament engine. Chris Norden, the lead programmer, said the decision came down to support. Quake was a shooter engine, and that's it. If you wanted to make something other than an FPS, it was a lot of work, and you got no support from id. They basically took a CD of code, threw it at you, and ran away. Unreal, by contrast, came with a powerful scripting and robust editor, and a team of digital extremes willing to offer help. They gave us all the source code and said, we'll do our best to support you guys, Norden recalled. There was no formal support structure, it was all one-on-one though. The licensing deal was flexible, affordable, and most importantly, moddable. But that flexibility came with hidden cost. Technology forced design changes, Spector admitted. It took time to become familiar with the Unreal Engine. Months of experimentation were necessary to reveal how best to do things in Unreal, and what things not to do at all. Unreal was built for deathmatch arenas and corridor shooters. Deus Ex needed branching dialogue, stealth systems, skill trees, augmentations, and emergent AI behavior. Everything had to be layered on top. We added blended animations, real-time lip syncing, a conversation system, a scripting system for missions, and a sophisticated user interface library, said programmer Albert Yaruso. Most of the features we've added to the engine have been RPG-centric. The team hacked in systems that modern engines take for granted. There was no support for ladders, so Norden wrote a workaround using texture tags and raycasting. Scent trails were prototyped for tracking dogs, particle systems were modified to be triggerable. Even camera splines had to be visualized from scratch. It was really a simple thing, Norden said, of adding basic camera tools. I don't know why we had to add it, but I guess Tim Sweeney just didn't think they needed it. Emergent behavior came almost by accident. I was standing on top of a 3-story building with a pistol, said AI programmer Scott Martin. Guards were patrolling below me, oblivious to my presence. I fired off a couple of rounds which the guard shouldn't have heard, because the pistol was silenced. But when the guards drew his weapon, scanned the area, turned and ran, because the shell casing from my pistol bounced off the side of the building and landed near him. That kind of logic hadn't been planned, but it was exactly what they were chasing. As Martin put it, emergent behavior is a feature, not a bug. Yet even with all the customization, they never fully understood the engine. Spector explained the biggest limitation. There were areas where we ended up treating the engine as a black box. Once players started reporting performance issues, we were kind of in a lurch. We couldn't very go well in there and mess with the Unreal Engine. We just didn't understand it well enough to do that safely. Still, Spector stood by the choice. Unreal certainly allowed us to focus on content generation, and we were able to make what I hope is a state-of-the-art RPG action-adventure sim with only 3 slightly overworked programmers. That trade-off between control and accessibility, purity and compromise, would come to define Deus Ex. It was no longer the game they wrote in that first 300-page document, but it was becoming something else, a system-driven world, born from friction, held together by ambition. But that friction wasn't just creative, it was structural. The deeper they went into production, the more the cracks inside Ion Storm Austin began to widen. What started as a team united by vision became a studio divided by philosophy. And it wasn't just disagreements. It was a cold war between 2 design teams, 2 worldviews, and 2 incompatible approaches to game design. Warren Spector had hoped competition would spark innovation. Instead, it nearly tore the game in half. Spector's original plan was to avoid conflict by embracing it. When he found himself with 2 experienced candidates vying for the lead designer role, he didn't want to choose. I got cute, Spector admitted. I created 2 design teams, each with its own lead. The goal was synthesis. One team from the traditional RPG lineage, the other rooted in immersive sim design. Spector believed a little tension would push the project forward. I thought I could manage the tension between the groups, and that the groups in the game would be stronger for it. My plan didn't work. From day one, the structure failed. The teams wouldn't even settle on neutral names. Spector had to call them Team A and Team 1. because neither would accept being 2 or B. Inside the studio, debates became trench warfare. There were 2 distinct subcultures inside the level design movement, and they were at times hostile to each other, said Harvey Smith. One was the fantasy group, and one was the realism group. One wanted to build the world to support game navigation, and the other wanted to build to the actual proportions of what a bar or street would be, Picardi explained. Even their tone was different. We were working with some daft subject matter, Smith said, but we took it seriously. Worse, the communication between disciplines began to fall apart. Half of the designers wouldn't talk to the other half, Spector recalled. It was incredible and tense. But out of that tension came something really special. Some of the tension came from a shared trait. Almost everyone on the team was extremely smart and extremely opinionated. There were smart people everywhere, said audio director Alexander Brandon. One person in particular was a rocket scientist, Bob White. So we had a lot of people that were smart, and that's also what created a lot of friction. Brandon recalled long arguments that couldn't even be resolved because people struggled to speak plainly or make hard decisions. There were people that didn't know how to say, okay, I understand why you believe that. I don't believe that, but I have to make this decision. Spector, too, was a part of the problem. We've lovingly ribbled Warren for not wanting to make a difficult decision around all that, Smith said. Spector himself even admitted it. Man, was I wrong. What I ended up with was kind of a war. Eventually, he was forced to merge the 2 teams and name a singular lead designer. He chose Harvey Smith, someone who fit the looking glass mold and believed in player-driven systems. It all worked out okay in the end, Spector said, but it was pretty stressful for a while. Ironically, the design chaos mirrored the themes of the game itself. Competing ideologies, unclear chains of command, and conspiracies within conspiracies. And yet, from this fragmented infighting team came a singular vision. It wasn't clean, it wasn't smooth, but Deus Ex wasn't supposed to be. It was a game about navigating a fractured world. It was only fitting that it had been built by one. The first challenge the team had to solve in building levels for Deus Ex was figuring out how to design spaces that supported the game's foundational promise, player freedom. From the start, Ironstorm Austin committed to what Warren Spector called shared authorship, which meant designing every location as a playground for possibility, not a narrow corridor of designer intent. Spector described the structure as a string of pearls, a series of linear plot points that players would all hit, but with open-ended spaces in between where the player had total control over how they got there. As designer Austin Grossman explained, an individual level had a lot of space in it that you could stick around and explore, or you could go straight through. We called it the string of pearls structure. It was explicitly designed that way, with the expectation that plenty of players would miss whole chunks of it. To make that work, the team knew early on that they needed what Spector referred to as proto-missions, fully playable but early test levels that will let the designers prototype all of the game systems and see how they interacted. In May of 1998, they built 2 such test maps, a portion of Hong Kong and a version of the White House. These crude maps were not built to look pretty, but to test systems. Conversation, interface, inventory skills, and augmentations were all at least hacked in, so we could see them in action, Spector recalled. To our advantage, we resisted the temptation to do just the stuff we knew would work, and the stuff that would look the prettiest, and prototyped new risky stuff first. These early tests revealed critical problems in the game. The levels were too big, running poorly on the technology of the time, which forced the team to break them into smaller pieces. Worse, the supposedly thrilling skill and augmentation systems lacked tension or payoff when actually used, as Spector explained. I thought the tension of standing outside a locked door, not knowing if a guard was going to show up while you picked the lock, would provide sufficient excitement. As it turned out, when Gabe Newell from Valve came down and played our prototype missions, he correctly identified the utter lack of tension. The team went back to the drawing board and, under Harvey Smith's direction, overhauled the systems to make each interaction more meaningful, dramatic, and tied to player expression. And thus, the team organized the rest of development around refining the proto-mission approach. They built the bare-bones version of every level as quickly as possible, to understand the overall game shape. Spector called this the "wow, these missions suck" milestone, where they realized just how far they had to go to make the game feel alive. But it paid off. This milestone made it clear that the time had come to make cuts, while giving us enough knowledge to cut intelligently. What was left was the best 270 pages, the stuff that worked. To keep levels both fun and plausible, the designers leaned on what Spector called simulated depth. Each space had to logically support player agency. Stealth players needed shadows and crawl spaces, gunners needed lines of sight and cover, hackers needed access points and terminals. But these paths weren't just bolted on. They were meant to overlap and cross-pollinate. As Spector explained, "We don't care if they pick a lock, talk someone into giving them the key, or blew the door up. All we needed to know was that they were going to get through the door." This flexibility led the team's obsession with secondary effects, Systems had to interact emergently, not just linearly. If you've got a locked door, an explosive barrel, and a man in black who we've set up to explode when you kill them, the combination of those two things blows the door off its hinges, Spector explained. Now you've made a lot of noise, which attracts more bad guys. So there's a secondary effect and a tertiary effect. The levels had to accommodate all playstyles, but also account for consequences. A loud combat approach would draw more enemies and possibly change how future NPCs reacted, while a stealth approach might leave enemies alive, who could complicate future missions. The AI was designed to hear and see things logically, reacting to sounds like shell casings or blown out doors. Programmer Scott Martin recalled a playtest where a sniper round hit the Statue of Liberty. The casing dropped several stories, and an NPC below turned toward the noise and began searching for the player. We actually had to limit the seeing and hearing red eye of NPCs because the game became too hard otherwise. But every step toward deeper systems also introduced more complications, as Grossman joked. They poured a whole bunch of different game systems into it, and then frantically tried to tune and correct and manage it, which was exciting, but it led to a lot of uncertainty. That tuning meant embracing the unpredictable. Designers would intentionally encourage exploits or solutions they hadn't planned for. One player might climb a wall using a makeshift ladder of explosives. Another might detonate a chain reaction using a man in black to blow open a route. But for the team, that emergent creativity was the whole point. It allows players to solve problems in ways that we didn't anticipate, Spector said. That's the pleasure of authorship, the pleasures of unique experience, the pleasures of doing something that hasn't been possible ever in human history. Even dialogue and character reactions were integrated into the level design loop. Players might be scolded by NPCs for messing with the environment. Designers like Chris Norton built real-life lip sync systems to support the mountain of dialogue, allowing for scenes where NPCs would interrupt their lines to acknowledge the player's behavior. If you're in somebody's office being a jerk and breaking stuff, the characters should say something, Spector insisted. It was chaos, but it was planned chaos. That was the ethos of Deus Ex's level design. No railroads, no binary paths, just a dense interlocking simulation, where players could write their own stories through the levels. As Harvey Smith later explained, the levels had to be simulated just deeply enough that players could try something and say in the real world, logically if I do X, Y will happen. That logic and its limits were tested over and over until the levels worked, not because they followed a script, but because they invited players to break it. With the level design figured out, the next problem was taking the role-playing systems that let players make meaningful choices minute by minute, without drowning them in spreadsheets or dice rolls. From the start, Warren Spector and Harvey Smith were adamant. Deus Ex wouldn't be about abstract stats or opaque mechanics. It would be about letting players express themselves in the world. As Spector explained, character differentiation was to be paramount. Even more important, though, was a desire to ensure that those character differences would be more than cosmetic. They had to be expressible, minute to minute, in a deeply simulated game world, resulting in a unique gameplay experience for each player. That meant getting rid of the many traditional RPG systems Spector had once helped pioneer. He put it bluntly, to my mind, if we can craft a believable physics simulation that lets players manipulate objects in direct, believable ways, why would we ever want to introduce die rolls to determine the outcome of such object manipulation? That philosophy led the team to rethink character development entirely. Rather than ask players to roll for success, the design would show consequences in the world. Want to sneak through the dark? Upgrade your vision. Want to blow through walls? Install ballistic augments. And then show the world react. This approach had to be enforced in every system. As Harvey Smith put it, we constantly attempt to provide multiple paths through an area and multiple solutions to a problem. We also attempt to build in consequences to violent actions. The team knew that if they failed at mechanical differentiation, the entire game would fall apart, as Spector explained. If it turns out at the end of the game that there is an optimal set of skills and augmentations, we have failed in what we set out to do. The solution was to build the game around core tools and let players choose their style. You could max hacking and sneak past enemies through back doors, or you could bulk up weapon skills and wait into every encounter gun blazing. Smith famously described the game as a D&D with guns, and Spector reinforced the point. The power is in the minute-to-minute gameplay. Everybody's going to go to the Statue of Liberty. The question is, how do you do it? But empowering player choice came with a cost: testing. Holy cow, testing is very hard when players are empowered at that level that we try to empower them, Spector admitted. We can test the linear narrative, but we can't predict how players are going to play. Their workaround was to test the extremes. One playthrough with 0 kills, another never being seen, and another where the player talked to everyone. If the extremes work, Spector reasoned, anything in the middle is going to work too. To make this all viable, the team needed deep systemic design. where mechanics could chain into another. The player could shoot an explosive barrel to blow open a door, or wait for an enemy NPC to walk by and blow him up instead. Spector described the emergent logic. Kill that man in black, he blows up, which blows up the explosive barrel, and the combination of those two things blows the door off its hinges. So you get through the door in a way that wasn't pre-planned, but was a result of the system working together. These systems enabled choice, but they also made scripting a nightmare. Designer Sheldon Picotti described a typical problem. It's hard enough writing good dialogue for a linear story. If you add to that 3 true-false flags, you often end up with a logic puzzle that makes it almost impossible to get inside a character's head. He did eventually develop a solution though. Write one whole thread cleanly first, then go back and branch the logic. And because the dialogue was interactive, it also had to be reactive. Picotti wanted players to feel like NPCs noticed them. The now famous moment where Anna Navarre stops briefing you mid-sentence to say, "What the hell are you doing?" If you mess around in her office came directly from this principle, as Norton recalled. One of Warren's examples was if you're in somebody's office being a jerk and breaking stuff, that character should say something. But giving players that kind of authorship wasn't just about narrative branches or stat-driven abilities. It required a world that could respond to the player's choices. That meant developing an AI system capable of noticing behavior, not just enemy behavior in combat, but how every NPC reacted to sound, movement, and tone. As programmer Scott Martin explained, the team went beyond simple line-of-sight detection. I was standing on the Statue of Liberty and shot at a distant terrorist with a sniper rifle. Shell casing dropped several stories and landed next to another terrorist, who heard the sound. That enemy became suspicious, looked toward the casing, and started searching for the shooter. In another internal test, a stray bullet hit a secretary. She panicked, grabbed a knife, and triggered a facility-wide alert. To avoid total chaos though, the team had to design what Martin called forgiveness systems. NPCs might call for help or trigger alarms when they heard gunfire, but they would eventually calm down. The idea of a guard remembering forever that you made a noise behind a wall didn't make sense or good gameplay. It's unrealistic, but it's good gameplay, said Martin. Spector echoed the same logic. The game had to give players room to recover from mistakes. NPCs had to eventually forget that some dude in a trench coat was detonating explosive barrels in their headquarters. None of this came easy though. The team had to invent many of these systems from scratch. To support interactive conversations across thousands of lines in multiple languages, Chris Norton developed a real-time lip-syncing system using fast transforms. It was a technical breakthrough. I created this initial test level, which was basically just a big head in a room. It matched up almost perfectly. And it was all done in real time, which I think had never been done before at that time. Every piece of this, from stealth AI reactive behavior to branching dialogue and expressive faces, was built to serve one vision, not just to simulate a world, but to simulate how that world responded to you. Whether you were sneaking past guards, hacking through terminals, or kicking open doors, Deus Ex never forgot that you were the one writing the story. The final stretch of Deus Ex development was a blur of stress, revision, and ambition. The music and audio work had been a standout success. Alexander Brandon and Michael Vanderbos composed a soundtrack defined by ambient textures, rhythm synths, and sample-based limitations that bred creativity. Deus Ex used mod files to keep music under 1.5 megabytes per track, forcing composers to get inventive. Brandon explained, "Limitations and mods absolutely bred creativity. That's what gave Unreal and Deus Ex their unique character. Even though the tools were primitive by today's standards, the use of vertical step sequencing and sample swapping helped establish Deus Ex's moody, cyberpunk tone. The lack of strict direction gave Brandon and Vandenbos room to write freely. We didn't communicate a ton regarding similarity or shared instrument sets," Brandon said, "but we seemed to really get a notion for an overall aesthetic." By mid-2000, Deus Ex was nearly finished, but the team wasn't confident in how it would land. Chris Norton recalled that even post-launch, the game felt like just another niche PC release. "We didn't know what was going to happen," he said. "It didn't become a real hit until many years later, so we all had no idea what was coming." Sheldon Picotti also felt uncertain. At the time, few people expected video games to represent reality, or tell a story you actually believed in. So I was thrilled to find a team that was trying to make that happen, but I had no idea if fans would get it. Inside Ion Storm Austin, the pressure was brutal. Multiple developers, including Norton, Picotti, and Bear, described sleeping under desk, crunching 7 days a week, and watching their relationship suffer. You don't get to see your friends very often, your wife or girlfriend. You just never get to see her. It causes problems, Norton explained. The sacrifices weren't just personal, they were also systemic. That was in the days when people considered it a badge of honor to work themselves to death, which was super foolish. Even Warren Spector admitted it. "I feel a little guilty about how hard I worked on Deus Ex's team." And the long hours weren't always productive. Several systems had to be rebuilt later in the project. Our augmentation and skill systems proved dry and rather dull once implemented. Harvey Smith revised the skill and augmentation systems pretty thoroughly. The AI too had major issues. It was designed too early, in isolation, and didn't match the evolving gameplay. Instead of designing systems specifically for our needs, we ended up adding stuff and tweaking it until the bitter end, Spector explained. NPC behavior also changed constantly, right up to the last day of development. And there were also massive cuts to the game. The game originally had 25 missions, with locations like the London Underground, Russia, and even a space station that would have tied Deus Ex into the world of System Shock. As Scott Martin explained, in the final levels of Deus Ex, we were going to drop little hints that the space station was actually Citadel Station, but we scrapped the idea. Multiplayer, which the team desperately wanted, was also cut. That's my biggest regret, Spector admitted. We didn't want to do it half-assed, we wanted to do it right or not at all. And right now, not at all is the unfortunate answer. By the time the game shipped, morale was low. Tension with Ion Storm Dallas, which was floundering under Daikatana's failure, made things worse. Austin had tried to rebrand, even designing a new logo, but Spector ultimately didn't let them change the studio's name. That kind of us versus them thinking is rarely good in the long run, Spector said. Despite the stress, something held the team together, as Brandon put it. Yeah, it all sums up for me as a net super positive experience, something I really wish everyone could have had. When Deus Ex finally released, it didn't explode overnight, but the reviews were glowing. PC Gamer gave it a 94, Game Radar called it near perfect in every conceivable way. It sold steadily though, especially in Europe, and passed 1 million copies globally. It also won over 30 Best of 2001 awards. Spector, years later, still treasure the players' stories. The most important thing is what I heard and still hear from players, he said. They had unique experiences and did things we didn't know could be done. And he did credit the team above all else. Man, we had some talent at Ion Storm Austin, he said. They all wanted to make a game that might actually change things. Just making a good game wouldn't have been enough. Spector often singled out the leads like Chris Norton, the no-nonsense lead programmer who could deliver miracles overnight. Harvey Smith, the visionary design lead who refined broken systems and fought for clarity. Jay Lee, the endlessly hardworking artist who kept the studio from falling apart. And Sheldon Picotti, whose writings and philosophical knowledge gave Deus Ex its mind. We sometimes acted like a huge family of grumpy siblings, Chris Norton remembered, but it was a great team. The development had been grueling, crunch dragged on for months. Several developers worked 14-hour days, barely seeing their families. People slept under their desk, relationships fell apart, morale wavered, and pressures from the publisher increased. And at times, Warren Spector worried the project would collapse. They missed deadlines and they cut levels, entire mission arcs, and even a space station that would have turned the game into a prequel to System Shock. But what they shipped was enough to change games, enough to leave something behind. Its DNA can be found in BioShock, Dishonored, Prey, and Cyberpunk 2077. Games that chase the same dream of giving players total freedom inside a living reactive world. Deus Ex didn't create the immersive sim genre, but it gave it its soul. It proved you could combine RPG stats, stealth mechanics, open-ended combat, and philosophy into something coherent. It inspired studios like Arcane, Obsidian, and CG Projekt to aim higher. And it gave players a taste of something that still feels rare. The sense that you're not just playing a game, but carving your own path through it. And for Spector, that was the point. If you don't have anything to say, then you're just wasting everyone's time. If you enjoyed this video, check out this one here, because you'll like it as well.